I felt jubilant the moment it was done. The moment of jubilation did not come from the results showing that Peter Magyar was winning. The results rolling in and showing that they were even winning enough to have a supermajority necessary to change the Hungarian constitution, that did not create jubilation within me. What created jubilation within me was seeing how quickly Viktor Orban submitted to the results, said, you know what, we lost. He said, our patriotic bloc, that's how he frames himself, even though, I mean, Peter Magyar is basically just a giant flagpole anytime you see him at an event. He's either dressed like a Hungarian hussar, if you see his images of his coat, of his nice blue coat, or he is actively like flying around the Hungarian flag. You'll see somebody in the background with the old 1956 revolution flag. You'll see somebody else flying the flag with the coat of arms. You'll see every single variation that is possible of the Hungarian tricolor at one of his events. Like the only other flag that I have seen at his events is like, I think I've seen, even not even really at his campaign events, but at protest events that is associated with the opposition, you'll see more like EU flags as well. But largely because he's not like opposed to the European Union and he wants to try to get EU funds for Hungary that have been put on hold because of Viktor Orban's many violations of EU regulations. And if you're going to be part of the EU, you cannot stand above EU regulations and rules just because you are lay-based tradcon. Okay, let's see if I can pull this up. By the way, did you guys see Fidesz reacting to what he called regime change in Hungary? I mean, I don't know, like, most people would call that election. Did he call his election regime change when Fidesz lost? I mean, when Fidesz won, not Fidesz, Fidesz, I think his name is. Fidesz. I was mixing up Fidesz's name with Fidesz, and I just created a new person entirely. So, the election in Hungary is over. Viktor Orban is out, and he is out in a big way. It's not that he is just out. It's that his majority, which he has used to change the Hungarian constitution, has been completely pushed out to the point where the opposition, TISA, the party that was running against him, led by Peter Magyar, the man you see on screen, which was a former Fidesz party member, who then split off due to issues of corruption and child abuse scandals, which in the United States, doesn't that ring a bell right now? He split off, created his own party, campaigned hard across the entire country, visited every like Hungarian region, like went to villages everywhere. If you look at a map and compared Viktor Orban's campaigning and his campaign, it's not even comparable. It's like comparing like what you think like a 92-year-old man could do and like trying to walk around and like visiting last things before he perishes versus like an Olympic medalist, like sprinter, just like everywhere, just a hard campaign against a presidency that was, I mean, premiership that was corrupt, that was derelicting their duty when it comes to things like infrastructure. It was in constant scandal, whether it be the gay orgy scandal during COVID, where the person who authored their anti-gay laws was found to be in a giant orgy, which also happened to break COVID regulations, which was the reason it was a significant story, apparently. Or you could talk about the child abuse scandal, where party members did their best to cover up an abuse of children for their friends of themselves, you know, going out of their way to try to cover up people, move people around, and just like stuff that you would say is quite disgusting, combined with the corruption and combined with an image of a nationalist in Viktor Orban that seemed to be quite reliant on foreign capitals. You got Donald Trump coming in to endorse him. You've got JD Vance coming in to endorse him. You've got Benjamin Netanyahu coming in to endorse him. You got Vladimir Putin coming in to endorse him and support him. And when he lost, what was the thing they were chanting in Budapest? Russians out, Russians out, Russians out. Now, whether that was something that tipped the scale or not, I mean, Vladimir Putin is unpopular in Hungary, but so is Vladimir Zelensky. So I think his balancing on his position on Ukraine was in response to polling data that suggested that much of what Viktor Orban has campaigned on and going against the Ukrainians ended up sticking with voters. But at the end of the day, when you look at Peter Magyar, he didn't go out there and say, let's give weapons to Ukraine. He went out there and said, I'm not, it's not like I'm not going to block other countries from giving Ukraine aid, which was his position. It's like that's a very non-radical position. I don't want to give Ukraine aid. I don't agree with that, but we're not going to block the EU from giving them aid, which is miles and leaps and bounds ahead of Viktor Orban, but still behind other countries where Hungary should be a supporter. But because we've been in such a bad position, many Ukrainians in the EU is like, we'll take what we can get. I mean, if you look at EU presidents across the country, whether it's Macron or you're talking about the council president, they're talking about Peter Magyar as if all of their hometown baseball teams, I mean, they just went on and like won the World Series. Like they really just knocked it out of the park. So the reason why Peter Magyar won was because of the corruption, because he ran a good campaign, and because the issues that Orban decided to focus upon, like Ukraine, didn't really work on Peter Magyar, because he was saying he's going to start World War III, and Magyar is like, I don't even want to send aid to Ukraine. How can your campaign message be he wants to send your sons and daughters over to Ukraine to die, and then you turn over to him and you say, is that true? And he's like, I don't even want to give him a penny. It's just it completely diffuses it. And so when your main issue is going to be the cost of living, and you see the prime minister say, no, the main issue is your son's going to be sent off to a war to ignore the corruption, ignore the corruption, ignore the corruption. It just did not work. It did not work. And so I want to first comment on this campaign and this election by saying that anybody telling you that it was woke that did this is like, I see like wokeness one, woke this, woke that. Magyar came from Fidesz. He is a conservative. His position on migrants is as conservative as Viktor Orban, just in about every way. Now, when it comes to certain EU regulations on the issue of, people taking in refugees, he might be willing to comply with EU standard regulations, which is better than Viktor Orban. But when you listen to him, I mean, it's not too far off from where Viktor Orban's position was. And so in the same way that I look at people who are reacting to this by saying, well, now Hungary is going to look like Nigeria, or, Hungary is going to have a caliphate, just ridiculous fear mongering that you're to expect from the dredges on social media. I also don't truly really, well, no, I get it, but it's stupid. The people who are like, woohoo, the woke has won here. It's not that the woke has won. Basic opposition to corruption has won. A request for Hungary, after it had sacrificed so much for democracy and had, came so far since Soviet occupation, wants to continue with the civil society, does not want the power to continue to centralize. And after 16 years, he gave a proper run of it, and they're done with Viktor. Okay, they don't think Viktor needs to be in for over 20 years, 25 years, going on for like a for-life position. They have no interest in that. So the corruption, the problems with him centralizing power and around his civil society, the scandals, it wasn't him being progressive that won it. In fact, it was him not being progressive that probably allowed a lot of people who would have typically voted for Fidesz to feel comfortable in voting for somebody like Peter Magyar. Let me be clear, he's still much better than Viktor Orban when it comes to certain issues like LGBT people. Viktor Orban authored a constitution that tried to ban, homosexuals from being able to even protest and try to build a civil society where they can advocate for their own rights. Where Peter Magyar, he doesn't support gay marriage. I haven't seen him say he supports civil unions, but he says things like it shouldn't be a crime to love who you want to love. What does that mean? It means he's not going to ban Budapest Pride. He's not going to go out there and say, well, let's move on to banning media that portrays homosexuals in a positive light, which, I mean, those type of Russian-style laws were on their way to Hungary. I mean, we saw step one. I mean, what comes after step one? It's step two and it's step three. And so he has positions which in much of Europe and the United States should be typical and would still be considered either center right, but in this particular instance, because he has a dedication to institutions, or at least an avowed dedication to institutions, and because he is much better than Viktor Orban on the issues that counted this election, he won. Oh, and because he was also able to take the Fidesz strategy of promising handouts and just repeat it. So anybody who was worried about losing their pensions could be soothed by Peter Magyar saying, well, actually, I love the pensions. Well, actually, maybe we're going to keep the family allowance. Well, actually, we're going to keep all these things that right now might not be that economically feasible to keep, but people would like to keep. Hopefully, if they get the EU funds, maybe Peter Magyar thinks this can go in a different direction. He can save some of these programs, even if they're not increasing the birth rates like Viktor Orban said they would. They've already flatlined on that. So their intended policy impact, it's not happening. But now there's a group of people that would be quite mad to lose those benefits. And so he had to concentrate on at least protecting those for the campaign trail. We'll see if that goes into his administration as well. So that's why Viktor Orban lost, right? That's the kaleidoscopes of reasons as to why Viktor Orban lost. Now that he's lost, what's the difference? What's changed for real? Well, number one, and this is the biggest impact, and this is the most essential impact when it comes to Europe, when it comes to the transatlantic relationship. That is that he will stop blocking support for Ukraine. I see people watching people celebrate, looking up Peter Magyar, and they find out what I already know, which is that Peter Magyar is not out there saying "Batko nasze luzny." You know, he's not out there saying "Slava Ukraine, Hiram Slava," but he is not in opposition to giving Ukraine a means to defend itself. He isn't even on principle, seemingly, in opposition to giving Ukraine aid. His defense against giving Ukraine aid is Hungary is in a difficult financial position right now after 16 years of mismanagement. That tends to happen, and they can't afford it. That's different than if we give Ukraine weapons, the country will burn. If we give Ukraine weapons, we'll be dragged into the war. If we give Ukraine weapons, this will only further fuel the conflict. Or, you know, if we give Ukraine weapons, it'll hurt our relationship with Vladimir Putin. He clearly said that he's not going to call Vladimir Putin. He'll take Putin's call, but he's not going to call him. He's talking about him in a non-friendly manner. He saw the calls of Russians go home in Budapest, and he has no interest in angering what is now going to be a part of his base. But his position isn't principally against Ukraine aid, which means the main problem Hungary has been for Ukraine, which is a stick, a log that has been thrown into the gears of the machine of the European Union trying to give Ukraine support. One great example of this, and I think this is the most direct, immediate impact this is going to have. I talked about this on Live and Learn yesterday, and I'll talk about it again now. It is going to be aid to Ukraine. There is a over $100 billion package, a 90 billion euro package, and aid that Ukraine needs. Ukraine only has a few more months of state budget left. Let me be clear. I'm not saying that in a few months Ukraine will have to start no, I'm saying in a few months they would not have enough money to pay all their civil society all the civil workers and, you know, garbage collectors, people who make the state function, because they have had to take such a sizable portion of their budget, more than any other country in Europe, and dedicate it to their national defense. I mean, of all the countries in the world, it's definitely top 3 for military budgets. It might be number 1. I won't know for sure because Eritrea might still outpace them, but it very well could be and should be. And so for that reason, they are reliant on the European Union and other benefactors to keep the state functioning as they continue to resist and wait for a pause in the hostilities, or hopefully a stop in the hostilities. And that money was being held hostage by Viktor Orban after he had already said that the money could go through. But the money could go through on the condition that they agreed that Hungary doesn't have to contribute. EU agrees, Ukraine agrees, fine, we'd like your support, but you're not going to give us our support. And then they move on. Few months pass by. Russians blow up a pipeline that transmit fuel from Russia to Hungary that goes through Ukraine. And what did the Viktor Orban's government say? What does Budapest say? Repair that pipeline, or we're going to block the aid. Well, this was the second time that this had happened, and the Ukrainians had already repaired the Druzhba pipeline before. On the second occasion, they decided no, that they are not going to continue to spend Ukrainian state resources that are ever thinning on a repair project that is going to give the main benefactors benefit to what? Who? Russians and Hungarians. But again, namely the Russians, the nation state that's invading them. Why would they repair infrastructure that is being used to fuel the invasion of their country? Infrastructure that fueled the bombing of said infrastructure. This position led the Hungarian government, led by Viktor Orban, to say, we're going to block this aid package. Even if we're not contributing, that's not enough. They also have to repair the pipeline. The EU stepped in at some point. They said, hey, we'll repair the pipeline. But that statement was not enough for Viktor Orban to come in and say, hey, we're going to go forward with X, Y, and Z. And so this had been held hostage as the clock was continuing to tick on whether the Ukrainian state budget was going to be able to reinforce itself throughout the rest of 2026 into 2027. Because if they get the package, then they have enough to go into 2027. Well, now with Viktor Orban out, one of the first things this man said at a press conference was very clear, and he was pretty clear before, but was also clear post-election, which is really important, that they are not going to block the aid package. They're not going to contribute due to the financial situation, but they're not going to block it. So that means that this election, in and of itself, got rid of a roadblock for the most significant Ukraine aid package currently on the table in the entire world. So when we talk about direct impact of elections, when we talk about the need to participate in elections, this is a good example of that. So that's the first impact. That is something that allows Ukraine to continue to struggle into 2027. So that's the first impact of this. The second impact of this is the Hungarian constitution will be rewritten. Now, the promises from Magyar was that they will restore it to the pre-Viktor Orban constitution. Whether or not there'll be other alterations to try to prevent them going back that same route, or it'll be slightly different, I cannot tell you. But the general plan is to get rid of the centralization when it comes to what they thought were immoral anti-protest laws when it comes to the LGBT community, or the immoral centralization of power, or the gerrymandering when it came to the elections, or the centralization of power when it comes to the state media in Hungary, or the centralization of power when it came to private media being bought up by Viktor Orban's allies, which will be much harder to deal with, since that's not an issue of just regulation. That's an interest. That's a difference, or that's an issue of specific people buying up companies for the man. It's not like you could just pass a law that says Viktor Orban's friends can't have media. That's obviously not. That's not legal. That's not how that works. But the point is, the other impact is going to be the de-orbification. De-orbification might be, I think, makes it sound like it's orb, that they're going around removing all the orbs everywhere. But the de-Orbanification of Hungary is going to be the second main impact. Third, I think that this also means that Russia is going to have to change its strategy in Europe. Its strategy up to this point, as was directly coordinated by the Hungarian foreign minister, was to coordinate a opposition to Ukraine from inside the borders of the European Union by having the Hungarians block and hold and delay aid and support and different issues dealing with either punishing the Russians for invading or supporting the Ukrainians. Now that the Hungarians are gone, and when I say they're gone, I mean the Hungarians are gone from this allyship with Moscow. Where do they go? Obviously, Peter Magyar is not going to be there. The only other option that I can think of is FISO. Now, is FISO going to be enough? Are the Slovaks going to be enough? Probably not. It was one thing when it was Hungary and him, because the creation of these two characters that balance off each other wasn't exactly like how Hungary had that relationship, or specifically Viktor Orban had his relationship with the Law and Justice Party in Poland, and they kind of balance off of each other. I remember talking to politicians in Poland about this issue, and it was something that was a social taboo. I remember asking back in 2022 Polish politicians, he was the former deputy foreign minister of Poland, do you think Poland bears any responsibility for helping to shield Viktor Orban from the EU, considering now that he's, facilitating what's going on, backing up the Russians when it comes to this invasion? And his response was, I don't speak English. Mind you, up to that point, he had spoken perfect English in the conversation. it was that was very interesting to see the deputy foreign minister be so impacted by my question that he had forgotten the English language. But I don't know if that balancing act is going to be necessarily possible when it comes to the Slovaks and who else, because they need someone to balance off of. I mean, Babish's party did not win a majority of support in Czech in Czechia. That didn't happen. So it's not, you can't just go out there and just decide I'm going to take a completely pro-Russian view and you'll balance off of me. And it's not even like Babiš is exactly Viktor Orban. They're not the same character. You know, they're not going to take the same amount of risks. So I would say that no matter what Russia does, there's not really an avenue or a country or a person or an entity that can replace the impact that Viktor Orban has. The argument would essentially have to be, one second, I'm being told by Soy Pill, I think there's going to be a change in time. Give me a moment. The argument would have to be that Fico would stand up against all of Europe on his own. I don't believe that to be the case. I don't think that will happen. And even if it does, it will be probably simpler to deal with than Hungary. So I think this is the three biggest impacts that Peter Magyar's election is going to have. Here is the big asterisk I want to put forward. Peter Magyar went out there and made commitments and promises when it comes to social benefits. And in many instances, he did not just say he was going to preserve the social benefits, election handouts, whatever you want to call them, that were given and promised around election time by Viktor Orban and then implemented. And then the social effects of them when it comes to like birth rate, you know, the impact wasn't as impactful as many people would have first thought. He's not going to get rid of those. In fact, in some instances, he's talked about expanding them to try to counter Orban's claims of, you know, he's going to cut this, he's going to cut that. How is he going to deliver on that when he says that the situation in Hungary is so difficult that you cannot contribute aid to Ukraine? If the situation in Hungary is so difficult that you cannot contribute aid to Ukraine, how can it be in such a state that you will be able to not only preserve the social programs that have been promised, including those that are clearly election handouts that were meant to try to sway electoral support around election time? How are you going to do that if you're having problems with the budget? The only answer I can imagine is, well, once you start to get rid of the corrosive elements of corruption, that might open up new avenues for business, that might help start the process of the increase of the standard of living. As this process goes on, maybe they can take on some debt or more debt than what's already been taken on by the government of Viktor Orban. There could be a statement of, well, you know, we're going to get these EU funds once we get within regulations, and that will unlock funds that Hungary needs. In fact, Hungary is one of the main consumers of European Union funds. And so by unlocking those funds, that does open up a financial revenue stream. But he's going to have to deliver on a substantive portion of these promises, or when the conversation isn't necessarily Viktor Orban's corruption or the child abuse scandal or, you know, any of the other issues that led to Viktor Orban's defeat, what's going to happen if Viktor Orban, who was supposed to have a big conference on the 28th of this month, comes together and says something along the lines of, well, you know what? Here we go. I'm ready to go again. I'm going to run again. He didn't deliver on his promises. I delivered on mine. Elect me. So I'm interested to see how he delivers on these promises. Of course, his first mandate is going to be the de-Orbanification of the state, which should hopefully be the easier part of that mandate, but we'll see how that goes. The second part, delivering on the more policy promises that were put out and specifically chosen to be non-confrontational with much of the opposition, so you didn't have divides as you were trying to create a wide tent, as you tried to deliver on those promises, which then ended up being a lot of social promises when it comes to programs. That is something that I am more nervous about. taking back a lot of the money Orban and his government gave out through corruption. I mean, it's a lot easier to give out money as the government than get it back. This is going to be my blunt, my blunt comment on that. It's a lot easier